Hey friends, welcome back. This week we're going to talk about lens selection, specifically for bird and wildlife photography. Let's hop right into it. First of all, I want to make it very clear this isn't a Canon versus Nikon versus Sony lens comparison, but rather a comparison between different focal lengths. I'm going to be specifically focusing on a 100 to 400, the 200 to 600, and the big primes. I'm specifically focusing on these because all the camera companies have some version of this or have a version of it on the way. Another thing I want to make absolutely clear, these are all incredibly well-built lenses. They're extremely sharp. The focusing speeds on these newer lenses is incredible, and they're very light. With the new materials that they're using now, these 100 to 400 lenses are under 3 pounds. These larger 200 to 600 millimeter lenses, or a 200 to 500, are hovering around that 4-pound weight range. And these big primes, we're talking under 7 pounds, 6.4 pounds, 6.5 pounds. That's unheard of. You can now hand carry and hand shoot with a big 600 millimeter prime. It is a fantastic time to be a bird and wildlife photographer. Let's dive right into it and let's compare some of these focal lengths. Let's start with the 100 to 400. Sony, Nikon, and Canon all offer 100 to 400 millimeter focal length. They are all 4.5 millimeter to 5.6 variable aperture, and like I stated before, it's an incredibly sharp lens. So who is this lens for? Well, look, if you want one lens that gets you from landscape all the way to photographing small birds, this is the way to go. My wife shoots with this lens specifically. She doesn't want anything else. As a matter of fact, I'm going to let her tell you.
I got this 100 to 400 that I've had. I will never need another camera as long as I live. It's good for close-ups, good for stuff that's far away. I like this one better because it's lighter. It's extremely light. Like, I know people give me crap about that, but I'm the one carrying it for 3 miles, you know, and I climb over rocks. I like mountain climbing, and if I want to go up a tree, you know what I mean? I don't want some big, heavy camera hanging on me.
The weight of the lens is a big deal to Katie. She's 5 foot tall, she's a little lady, and carrying around something more than, 3 to 5 pounds, it gets a little cumbersome. Limitations on a 100 to 400, well, the first thing is aperture. 4.5 to 5.6, you're not shooting as late in the day as you would with a big expensive prime lens. However, 4.5 to 5.6 is absolutely fine. You get good background blur, specifically if you get closer to your subject. You also have the benefit of a minimal focus length of about 36 inches, and that's true across the board in all brands. What that means is if you want something that you can shoot almost macro with, this is the way to go. I'm going to show you some of the images that Katie's gotten with this camera. I do want to point one thing out though. I noticed that Katie crops in a lot in her images. I'm not talking about post-processing when you put it on Lightroom or Photoshop. What I'm talking about is she uses the DX mode that's built inside of the camera. All of the newer full-frame cameras have the capability to go from full-frame to APS-C mode, or DX mode as some of them call it. In this case, we have it set up with a touch of a button. I've noticed that Katie, when she's photographing birds, she uses that cropped-in mode just to make the bird look closer. Now, this doesn't mean that you're getting more focal reach. What it means is it's simply cropping in onto the sensor to make it appear like the bird is closer to you. Fantastic lens, guys. You can't go wrong with this. Just know that your limitations at the long end aren't great for bird photography. However, you get that extra 100 millimeters on the low end, and you have a wonderful minimal focus length of about 3 feet, which is great for those flowers, bugs, you name it.
Sony was nice enough to let me borrow the 200 to 600, and I used it while I was out in the field in Alaska. Unfortunately, I had to send the lens back, so I was smart enough to record my impressions while I was out in the field. It's a little rough. It's me walking around gathering shots, but you're getting that raw initial thought process as I'm using the lens. Carrying the 200 to 600, it's drastically different than the 100 to 400. Not only is it a little heavier, it just doesn't feel as balanced in the hand, but you're getting 200 more millimeters of focal length. You really don't notice the weight that much until you're holding the camera up in one spot for a long time, waiting for a bird to land. Listen, I understand that 200 more millimeters is huge. It's a big deal. But if you're going to be lugging around a camera all day and you know you're going to be sitting in situations where you have to hold that camera up for a long duration of time, that 100 to 400 is just incredibly light. Look, great lens. I haven't had a problem with sharpness once. Every image I take with it is beautiful. But Katie's right. This is just a heavier lens. This is 6.3, f6.3, which means I'm losing over my 600 f4. That's 1 1/3 stop of light. And that's a big deal when you're in these canopies like this. I'm just not letting in as much light, and the autofocus works a little bit slower. And I was trying to photograph a little Townsend's warbler, and if anyone's ever photographed those little guys, they move around like crazy. That's one of the only downfalls I've seen, is that when you're used to fast glass, that f4 or f2.8, f6.3 is going to leave you a little bit wanting. There's one thing that's true with all lenses, is they don't bring the birds closer. There's nothing I can do to get them to come closer, and I'm getting skunked right now. Okay, I had a little luck with an orange crown warbler against a blue sky. Not my favorite, but all right, we're getting shots. I'm constantly reminded that I picked the most difficult type of photography. Birds are a pain in the ass. I'm having fun, having a blast right now. You know what? It's a beautiful, lifelong hobby, because you just don't get what you want every time when you're out. You know, that 200 to 600 has sat most of the time on the side while we shot with the 600 f4 and Katie with the 100 to 400. And she likes that 100 to 400 because it's extremely light. It's a very light, versatile lens, has an extra stop of light. And G Master lenses for Sony, they're just a hair snappier. They feel like they grab focus quicker. So there's that to consider. When it comes to versatility, and if you're a bird photographer, it is hard to pass up on the 200 to 600 because you've got that extra 200 millimeters of reach, but it's a little bit slower, doesn't let in as much light. But when you nail it, it's good. It's a fantastic shot. So it just depends, right?
Here's some of the benefits of a 200 to 600 millimeter lens. Like I said at the very beginning, and I'll repeat this over and over again, it's an extremely sharp lens. Just like the 100 to 500 from Canon's extremely sharp, and I know that Nikon will probably be coming out with a 200 to 600 soon, but they have a 200 to 500 for the old DSLR cameras. That's an incredibly wonderful lens. Sony goes out to f6.3 on the long end. You lose another third of stop of light over the 100 to 400, which isn't too significant. Canon, they go all the way out to 7.1. That's not a big deal anymore like it used to be. With these newer cameras, the ISO performance is, 1, 2, sometimes 3 stops better than what it was even 5 to 10 years ago. So don't get freaked out about a variable aperture all the way out to 6.3 or even 7.1. It's not that big of a deal. What I think is one of the greatest benefits of a focal length, that 200 to 600 or 100 to 500 range, is that it's affordable. In the case of Canon, you're under $4,000. In the case of Sony, we're talking under $2,000. I think you can buy them used now for around $1,500. That's hard to beat. That is an incredible value. Sharpness, image quality, fantastic. I keep saying it, and I'm going to say it over and over again. I want to show you one specific shot that really impressed me though. The optical stabilization in these lenses today is just next level. I think Sony claims that it's 6 additional stops of stabilization. I'll double check on that. But here's an image that I shot at 1/80th of a second, handheld. I probably could have cranked up the ISO a little bit and cranked up the shutter speed, but not bad for a sub $2,000 lens. All right, let's move on to the big primes. The 600mm f4, that's where the buck stops. If you want to take away all excuses as to whether or not you're a good photographer, if you think you're limited by your equipment, this is where it all comes to an end. This is where you have no more excuses left. You have to know that you're shooting the best. One of the questions that I asked for the longest time, and I really didn't understand it until I bought one of these lenses, is why does a 200 to 600 or a 100 to 400 cost $2,500 or $2,000, and you're paying $10,000 more to get one of these lenses? Yeah, that's a tough question, and the way I've answered it is like this. You can, for under $5,000, you can get a fantastic lens and camera that gives you incredible image quality, better than anything we had out there 10 years ago, and it's, you know, you're 98% or 95% of what you get with a big lens like this. However, if you want the last 5%, you're going to something that has a much lower production run. The process to manufacture this lens is much more intense. There's bigger glass, there's more coatings on the glass, and when you're not making as many of them and you're shutting down manufacturing lines to make a big lens like this, the costs unfortunately go up. But is it worth it? That's the magic question, right? Well, yes and no. Would I love it if this lens was $5,000 less expensive? Heck yeah, and I think that would be the more reasonable price point for something like this. But once you shoot with a big prime, oh man, it changes everything. That last 5% or that last 10% in image quality, in my opinion, and the reason why they sell so many of these, it's just delicious. It's a little creamier, the foreground out of focus, the background out of focus, the sharpness of the images, you can just see it. Also, these lenses, the internal focusing systems on the newer ones, extremely quiet and extremely fast. So if you want to get maximum capability out of your camera, you have to go to something like this. Biggest improvements you can make in your photography, and I say it over and over again, is always somewhere between the floor and the eyepiece. You're the thing that needs to improve more than anything. You have to remember to get eye level with your subjects, get as close as you possibly can, take your time, make sure you understand your camera, you're using the right shutter speeds, ISO, and of course the right aperture for the situation. I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I hope it was helpful. Once again, I want to reiterate, all of these products are fantastic. You can't go wrong. When somebody asks me which one would I recommend, the answer is always, it depends. It depends on your pocketbook, depends on how much you want to carry around, and more importantly, it depends on how much versatility you want out of a lens today. Go out, take some good pictures, tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see some of your work. I appreciate you as always. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.